Because the book is just out and you won't have read it, we'll start by reading some passages to really set the scene and give you context and open up discussion from there. The novel's in three parts. The first part takes place mostly on trains, deporting people from Romania to Kazakhstan. The second section of the book, it takes place while they are in exile, and the third part of the book describes what it's like when they finally come home, which is changed, and they are changed. But I wanted to start and ask Monica and Liliana to read from a passage that sets the scene of the kinds of deportation that were taking place.
Yeah, so I'm going to read this passage where I just, I think this novel, I mean, it's clearly, one person's story, and we'll go into that a bit more, but really is about these deportations that are happening. And particularly in this time, it's by the Soviet Union, and it's not just Romanians from the part of, at the time, Romania in Bucovina, that's now Ukraine, but really in multiple regions. So the passage I'm going to read, the Romanians who are in this train that ends up being kind of a death train, they're actually at one point looking out at the situation where there's a ship that's sailing with more deportees, and they get really invested in this story. So I'm going to read that passage. Among those who were shoving to get into the last boat, I noticed a woman with 3 children. She was carrying a little one in her arms, and 2 were holding onto her skirt. The woman tried to get past the line of soldiers. She had seen that they were looking for people who were stronger and more or less healthy, who could get up quickly off the ground and were steady on their feet. Maybe she realized that those who would be left behind there were doomed to perish, abandoned, without food, without help of any kind. So she didn't give up and kept moving up to the front. A soldier pushed her. She didn't fall, but others got ahead of her. It was hard for her with 3 children, who she was holding on to tightly so she wouldn't lose them there. Meanwhile, the small boat was getting full too. The woman was agitated, desperate maybe. She kept walking around next to the soldiers and didn't know what to do. She took out some headscarves, some ribbons. From our window, it wasn't clear what. She tied the baby she was holding to her back, and the 2 bigger children helped her. She tied him up well, with tight knots, and with one hand held onto another child. The hand with which she had held the baby was now free, and the 3rd child was holding on tightly to the 2nd child. The hardest thing was to get past the first soldiers who were selecting people. Then the others formed a line on the opposite side, all the way to the boat. They'd notice something else, they'd check something out, maybe they'd ask you something, but only the first ones would turn you away. They'd push you and throw you to the ground by hitting you. The ones after didn't. We were watching to see what the woman would do. Would she get past? Would they let her? No, she hadn't gotten past yet. We could see who had climbed in. The small boat was closer to the train, and we could see more clearly. We could almost hear the woman and the soldiers yelling, but also the moans of the deportees in pain. Maybe there were also people from our train there. Maybe the people taken out of the boats were fellow Bucovinians. At one point, the woman got a running start and rammed into one of the soldiers selecting people. He lost his balance and fell, and the woman started getting past. The soldier next to him caught up with her and kicked her in the rear. She fell on her knees, but quickly got up. Her children helped her as well, and she ran ahead toward the other line of soldiers by the ship. I told our rail car, "Oh, the poor thing. Oh, the crazy woman. Will they shoot her?" The people in our rail car asked. "No, she's passed. She's getting on the boat now." The soldier who had been knocked down shook himself off. He yelled something. He pushed the people in front of him out of spite. But the woman was far away, and he left her alone. I saw how she got on the boat, how she quieted and stroked her children, how she untied the little one from her back and held him again. She beat a soldier. The villain collapsed when she let him have it, the wicked man, and she climbed in with her 3 children. People made way for her, and the other soldiers treated her with respect. We talked about it passionately.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Liliana, I know that that some of this material for this book came from research that you did, and some of it is your own invention. And I would ask if you would talk a bit about the inspiration and the relationship to the research of these different stories.
Thank you for your question. Yes, I edited in 2009. I edited a volume of testimonies of Bucovina deported people deported to Siberia and to Kazakhstan. And I decided do not write a novel because all testimony was very religious. And I'm born in a non-religious society. To us, all bisericile, churches was closed. My parents was teachers, and it was forbidden to go to the church, and we didn't have a Bible. My first Bible was after the fall of communist regime. And all these deportee survivors said if I didn't believe in God, I could not survive. And I said I can't write from the perspective of a deportee of survivor, because I have not this instrument for religious. And for me, it was a spiritual challenge to write after 10 years. And maybe I will say something in Romanian because it will be faster. La un moment dat au început să-mi apară imaginile cu crucile din lemn pe care și le doreau deportații pentru cei care au murit în tren pe marginea căii ferate.
At one point, she started seeing this image of these wooden crosses that the deportees would have wanted to be there to mark the graves or the places where the people who were deported died in the train.
Cunoșteam foarte bine istoria și viața unui deportat și mi-am dat seama că am nevoie de foarte multă energie și de foarte multă inspirație sau forță ca să pot duce la capăt o asemenea poveste.
So I knew these stories of these deportees from their oral histories, but I knew it would take a lot of energy and willpower to be able to actually have the inspiration to write these stories.
Și am înțeles că rugăciunea trebuie să vină din mine, nu trebuie să trișez, adică eu trebuie să învăț să mă rog.
And for her, Liliana was saying it was this really important process where, because religion, because faith was such an important element in the lives of these deportees and how they survived, she knew she would actually have to learn how to pray, that it had to come from an authentic place for her to be able to write this book.
Și în momentul în care eu am simțit că mă pot ruga ca un om care își dorește să supraviețuiască și să se întoarcă la casa lui, atunci eu am zis că sunt pregătită pentru un asemenea.
And the moment when I felt like I could really pray like someone who was praying to survive and to return home, that's when I felt I was finally ready to be able to write this book.
Și în acel moment eu am revenit la mărturiile bucovinenilor care m-au ajutat să-mi pun la punct propria voce și propria poveste, pentru că nu există un prototip al Anei.
And that's when I returned to these oral histories, the testimonies of the people who were deported, because there wasn't any kind of, model of what had happened during those years.
Nu am fost niciodată în Kazakhstan și când am descris capitolul în care ei erau acolo, și Monica a avut mari probleme din cauza asta, am apelat la niște antologii de proză pentru copii sovietice publicate în ultimii ani de comunism.
And I'd never been to Kazakhstan, so this was something that, when I wanted to write about it, I actually read these, books for children that were published in the last years of the Soviet Union, which gave me as a translator quite a bit of a headache in terms of fact checking.
Yeah.
So this is just fascinating. The book is structured to include the narrator's prayers as well as other characters' prayers. But I just want to ask, you mentioned seeing the roadside crosses that the characters talk about. Do you mean seeing them literally, or do you mean imagining
Um,
them.
We can see vision. So I don't dream, but I see every night, some months, every day and every night. I see like a picture.
Okay. So I ask this because the third section of the book is called Roadside Crosses. And one of the speakers in the novel sees these crosses from the train, but the other people on the train with her do not see these crosses.
No.
So the power of imagining a cross to mark the memory of those who died being deported or in exile is an impulse that we feel reading the whole book. It's very exciting to me to understand that that image of the crosses is something that also
Yes. I think
led you.
in Orthodox religion is very important. If you are died, if you did, you can have crosses. Every
Yes.
human being must have these crosses. And they a fost aruncați ca un sac de cartofi.
They were thrown out like a sack of potatoes. So
Yes.
in the novel, kind of without dignity. So it's the narrators, you know, she's telling the story, this desire to actually mark their lives, which now as I'm realizing, I mean, is very much, you know, telling the stories is another kind of invisible cross.
Și de fapt am vrut să arăt cât de demni erau acești oameni.
And to give them dignity.
Well, that idea that the book is written partly to mark the meaningful deaths or to make sure the deaths are meaningful, maybe I will use that as a transition to another passage, with the observation that most of the novel is told by a very old woman remembering what happened when she was 11 years old. And so especially the first third of the book in the rail cars, in the train, is seen from a child's perspective. So, and we're carried into that child's perspective in her memories. And there's the children in the stories respond to their terrible circumstances in a different way from the adults. And so I want to read one short passage to suggest that. Again, the novel as a whole is, at least the framework is, it's being told by Anna, who is the great-grandmother, to her great-granddaughter, who is a somewhat resistant listener, but the grandmother says, well, there are also stories that would make you cry, but we were children, and we quickly got tired of crying and moaning. After 2 weeks, this is in these terrible rail cars, after 2 weeks, we acted as if we had been born in the train, as if that were our home. We played, we were happy, as skinny, hungry, and lice-ridden as we were, with the sunbeam, with the cat.
Citesc în română?
Shall we also read in Romanian? Go ahead, Liliana.
Ei, au fost și povești de plâns. Era întrebarea cât de interesant povestești, Cuță. Era vesel acolo în tren. Mama m-a rugat că nu cumva să mă apuce râsul când povestești despre deportare. A zis, Cuța a suferit, iar tu râzi. Și Cuța răspunde, ei, au fost și povești de plâns, dar eram copii și ne săturam repede să plângem și să ne văităm. După 2 săptămâni ne purtam de parcă ne născusem în tren. Acolo era casa noastră. Ne jucam, ne bucuram, așa slabi, flămânzi și păduchioși, ba cu roaza soarelui, ba cu motanul. Încă din primele zile ne-am apucat să învățăm limba rusă și tare bine ne-a prins.
And then I thought maybe, Monica, you would read us this passage of some of the things the children do to pass the time on the train it's the speaker's birthday.
Mhm.
And today is Liliana's birthday, so that makes this a good passage to choose too. And in the rail cars, which are terrible and dark and have no amenities of any kind, from time to time, bales of straw get thrown into the car as they're moving along. And sometimes that's helpful so they can climb up on them and get a glimpse of sunlight. And sometimes that's helpful so they can throw dirty straw out. But the children find other uses for the straw, and this is a passage about that.
Yeah, so it's her birthday. And meanwhile, Jenny had found herself something amazing to keep her busy, which I happily helped with. All the children helped. In fact, I mean, all the girls. She started to braid a kind of mat out of straw. I had never seen such skill before. I tried it too, but my straws would come loose, while hers seemed to obey and stick however she wanted them to. The girls would search for straws that were as long and thin as possible. Then we'd hold on to the edges, as she instructed us. She made the first mat for her grandmother, Angelina Tsara, the one for my mother, then in turn she made them for others until no long, thin straws were left. When I told her I was saving bread for my birthday, she said she didn't need our help anymore for the mats, and she hid in the bales and braided alone. On my birthday, I prepared the bread with cherries and gave a piece to each of the children, which I had numbered beforehand with mother. I offered one to the child inside of the belly of the pregnant woman because I was sure he too must be craving goodies. When the door opened and they brought in the bucket of water, I gave some to everyone. And then I said they should first eat and then drink some water because jam makes you thirsty. How happy the children were. Mother said a prayer of thanksgiving to God as the other mothers tried to hide their tears. How happy they were to see us alive, eating bread and jam. And then, after I had passed it out and we had eaten it, it had quickly melted in our mouths. Jenny and all the children looked at me secretively and said, "The birthday girl will now receive a present." And they handed me a wonderful doll. It was big, made of straw, with a skirt from a piece of someone's headscarf, with hands, feet, and little boots made from twisted ribbons, with 2 blonde plaits done in French braids. It definitely wasn't Jenny who braided them, but Aglaya German, who French braided her younger sister's hair. And in its hand was a flower, made of straw as well. It also had a face, with eyes, with a nose that was a bit big, and a mouth that grinned from ear to ear. So this was the mat Jenny was secretly braiding when I told her about my birthday.
Pe 20 iunie mi-am sărbătorit ziua de naștere. 11 ani făceam. Cu multe zile înainte, eu cu mama, apoi și Jenny, care i-am spus secretul, ni s-a alăturat, economisisem și pusesem deoparte bucățele de pâine primită drept hrană. Le înveleam într-un prosop să nu se usuce. Apoi le-am pus pe o farfurie mare și mama a pus deasupra câte o cireașă din fiecare ulcică cu dulceața adusă cu noi de acasă, pe care o ținuse special pentru ziua mea. Când s-au deschis ușile și au adus căldarea cu apă, am împărțit la toți și le-am zis întâi să servească, apoi să bea apă, că dulceața îți face sete. Ce bucurie pentru copii! Mama a rostit o rugăciune de mulțumire lui Dumnezeu, celelalte mame lăcrimau pe ascuns. Ce bucurie să ne vadă în viață, mâncând pâine cu dulceață!
Thank you. I wonder, Liliana, if you could say a little bit about the importance of telling the story from the old woman's perspective to her great granddaughter. I will say too, as we're reading, sometimes we forget that that's the frame, and we travel with the great grandmother into her memories, and sometimes the great granddaughter interrupts or has something to say, and we're brought back into the present moment, and we remember it's an old lady. The stories themselves are so compelling, it could almost have just been told by memory. So why is it important to you to structure it this way?
There are two ideas. First was this povestea spusă.
Spoken story.
Aici avem un fel de concluzie în toate mărturiile pe care eu le-am studiat.
In all the oral histories that I had studied, there was this conclusion that people kept coming to.
În general, în 2017, cred, a murit și ultimul supraviețuitor din mărturiile pe care eu le-am editat.
And in 2017, the last person who had given this oral history in the volume that she had edited died.
Cei care povesteau erau deja oameni foarte în vârstă și ei spuneau, eu nu mai vreau nimic, vreau ca cei care vin după noi să cunoască prin ce am trecut.
And everyone who had spoken about these experiences, they were already quite old when they had given this oral history, and they had all said, there's nothing else I want in life other than for our stories to be told.
Și a doua idee a fost ceea ce spunea despre o persoană foarte în vârstă care este totuși foarte conștientă și povestește coerent.
And she also wanted to create this character of someone who was quite old, but was very lucid and was able to really tell her story coherently.
Inițial, eu mă gândeam la o femeie în vârstă și bolnavă, care repetă, care nu mai știe ce spune, care pierde firul poveștii.
She was saying that initially she had first thought that maybe this character would be someone who was, repeating things. Maybe it was just more a stream of consciousness, and that was her first idea.
Dar am cunoscut personal oameni care aveau 90 de ani și chiar după 90 de ani, care au stat 10 de ani în închisorile comuniste și erau lucizi, înțelepți și foarte sănătoși mental. Și
But then through my research, I actually met older people who were in their 90s who had spent years in prison during the communist years, who were very lucid and who were able to tell of their experiences in a way that was completely coherent, and that really influenced me.
Și pentru traseul foarte complicat pe care l-a avut personajul principal, avem nevoie de o minte foarte clară și de o memorie bună.
And it's very obvious, it became obvious to her that to be able to follow this very complicated story, this complicated journey of the narrator, it had to be something that we could follow as readers.
Și la un moment dat a apărut moda de a-i duce pe bătrâni la azil, de a-i duce la o casă de bătrâni și niciun bătrân la noi, cel puțin, nu vrea. Pentru noi asta este rău absolut.
And Liliana was saying that at some point in the Republic of Moldova, people started thinking we can take older people to nursing homes, and that was something that no older person wanted. So it's also a kind of interesting historical moment.
Și rolul acestei strănepoate era unul foarte delicat, ca să o convingă pe această bătrână care stătea singură într-un sat părăsit să meargă la casa de bătrâni. Nu este o idee principală în carte.
And so then there was this figure of the great granddaughter who was in a very delicate position of having to convince this older woman who's kind of there alone in her village to go to a nursing home. And I would just add, I think that's what you were referring to, Jennifer, when you talked about the great granddaughter who's, this interlocutor who's hearing all these stories, but, she gets there kind of not expecting to hear these stories at all and not necessarily wanting to, which is maybe where we as readers, kind of start off in this kind of ignorance of these survivor stories.
Și povestea încearcă să o convingă prin povestea ei. Ana încearcă să o convingă pe strănepoată că locul ei este acolo unde este ea, la casa ei, că ea vrea să moară la casa ei și nu la o casă de
And in some ways, the story also happens because Anna, the narrator, also wants to explain to the great-granddaughter why she needs to stay in this village, why it's so important that she remains in her home.
Yeah. There is this passage where the great-granddaughter is coming to the realization. She starts by saying, "Poor thing, I told myself she must be really sick if she doesn't even know what she's talking about. But she does know where she is. She knows, and she's telling her story because she can now. She doesn't have to hide it anymore. And she believes she'll die in her own house. At my hearth is what she keeps repeating." So,
ceea ce aici lipsește este faptul că povestea deportaților era în primul rând necunoscută și în al doilea rând atât de incredibilă încât strănepoate îi se părea că nu este reală.
And Liliana's adding here that this is in some ways, what is actually true, in the sense that the stories of these deportees were so little known and so unbelievable that there actually were, great-grandchildren who really had no idea about the stories of what their great-grandparents went through.
Până la căderea comunismului nu era o temă tabu, nu puteai să vorbești despre.
Until the fall of communism, it was absolutely taboo to talk about.
Yeah. She's telling her story because she can.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I want to jump to something completely different.
So much that's different in this novel.
Just to say, the novel is also punctuated by songs and prayers, partly, well, entirely because of the role that songs and prayers play in keeping people going. I thought this might also be something, Monica, you could talk about as a challenge for translating, but that we could begin with one such song, which is a sort of a song spell that a woman in the train sings to try to help another woman who is quite ill. And you can decide how much of this you want to read. It begins with a sort of a medicinal spell, and it transforms itself into an address to the train conductor, and then it becomes a prayer. It keeps changing, but I thought maybe you'd start with the spell.
Sure. If these I had, I'd break the spell, and from her illness make her well. We heard our dear Tudorica begin singing. If I had 3 walnuts in their shell, willow from the river, meadowsweet for fever, the leaves or seeds at least of jewel weeds, arnica, horsetail, valerian, yellow gentian, borage, lovage, sage, thorn of sloe, lady's mantle, mallow, burdock, and yarrow, some woodruff, woodworms enough, viper's bugloss, bulrush, comfrey, danewort, smooth cecily. These in sweet Bucovina are found, in fields and gardens, in the ground, plants that heal and take away the pain you feel. If I had at least one, her sickness could be undone. But in the train, there's no chance, no sun for the plants, no waters that's clean, prayers don't reach the unseen.
Thank you for selecting this fragment because it's from my experience. As student, I collected folklore from my village, and I have 3 notebooks, and I hoped some days to use it, and this day come and I use in my novel. I will read like un descântec adevărat. De-aș avea, aș descânta ca să scot boala din ea. O auzeam pe Dudorița noastră cântând. Nu că între-i dungi aș vrea salce din râu, noduri de paie de grâu, flori sau frunzulică măcar de antonică, boz, cătușică, drențe, sau fulgoage, hagimă izdată, floare de împușcată, întorsura amară în gură, mărăcine de porumbar, mintă neagră, odolean, peleniță și oman, sânge de 9 frați, slăbănoc de dat la vaci, trosco, trestie, văzdoagă, zburătoare, ventriloagă, toate în dulcea noastră Bucovină, în poiană și în grădină, buruieni vindecătoare, ce aduc mare ușurare. Măcar una de-aș avea, aș scoate boala din ea. Dar în tren, aici, de unde? Nici soarele nu pătrunde, și nici apa cea curată, și nici ruga luminată.
Beautiful. Yeah. It's so nice to hear it in the original.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I did my best to try to keep at least some of the rhyme, some of the rhythm, but it was definitely a challenge. And I have to say, I changed, of course, a lot of the plants. And that's where the real research came in, because they literally had to grow in Bucovina. That part is the same in both spells. They are literally plants that the Tudorica woman chanting the spell had back where she lived, and now wishes she had. So it's, while it's a spell, it's also this kind of longing for home, even as she's casting the spell.
Well, what I love about it is it's these very specific names of plants, and she's listing what they don't have. It's kind of, if I had them. And yet there's a sort of a power to that, and a kind of collecting of the names and a reminder of home that serves something in the course of it. If we're not home, I'll think of the plants of home, and if I can't have the plants, I'll call over their names, and the rhythm of them as a spell.
That's right.
Will have a certain power to. There's so many songs in this book. I'm thinking too, another song that you said mattered to you, the second section of the novel, the exile, which comes after they've gotten off the trains, and they don't know
in the middle of nowhere
where they are. It begins with a song that actually addresses the train and goes through some of what they feel, and maybe you'd read. It's a long song. Maybe
I'll read the
last section. So this is sort of to mark the transition in the novel and to plant us in the new place.
They took us to a godless land, and from sweet Bucovina band, to our own country never to return, and forever there to yearn, lost among aliens, all because we're Romanians. Sing it out, if you can, we found ourselves in Kazakhstan. Ravens have their chicks at home, we were left there, all alone.
Aș vrea să spun că, în afară de rugăciune, și cântecul are această putere vindecătoare.
So in addition to prayers being very powerful, also songs have the power to heal.
Cântecele acestea sunt adaptate după cântecele reale ale deportaților pe care le-am găsit în revista Țara Fagelor.
So Liliana, actually, these are original songs that she adapted from real survivors of the deportations.
Stai că am închis acum. Așa.
La partea două.
La două, scuze. Așa, eu chiar mă gândeam să cânt, dar nu știu dacă o să fiu acum în stare. Așa. Apar și refrenul de muzică populară. Vinovați, dar fără vină, ne-au dus în țara păgână din frumoasa Bucovina, în țara înstrăinată, să nu venim niciodată, să ne pierdem prin străini, pentru că suntem români. Foaie verde, măgheran, ne-am trezit în Kazakhstan, corbuș are puii lui, nu era mai nimănui, of, of.
Beautiful.
Nu chiar așa era, dar aproximatively.
It wasn't exactly this way, but that's kind of, you get the idea of what the songs might have been like.
So are the songs a combination of songs that you did that did exist? Are some of the songs you made up, you invented?
I invented the age of my person, and I adapted for a person who lost a mother and lost their parents. And I adapted some places because some songs was with Siberia, and I said Kazakhstan, and I need for Kazakhstan another rima.
Yes.
and I adapted, but sometimes the idea and some verse was the original deported songs.
And the tune that you're singing, the music from it?
I improvised tonight, but I think they improvised too.
Yes.
In Kazakhstan.
Yes.
After the real things, folklorical. Original things.
Yeah, it's kind of a folk melody that you can play around with.
Yes. I'm wondering if there's another section that you'd like to speak to or think about, maybe the passage with the roadside crosses, or the third section is called roadside crosses. Could
Yeah.
you say a little
Yeah,
bit? We spoke a little bit about that.
Yes.
Now I'm excited to learn that that's one of the visions that launches the novel, but could you say a bit about that as a title for the third section?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot that goes into the third section, right? So if the first section is about this terrible, train trip to the middle of nowhere, which is, they end up in Kazakhstan, and the second section is, they're living their life somehow, and there's, all these incidences, it's tragic, but it's also funny, it's incredible, everything that happens. The third is kind of the aftermath of that, when everything's kind of over, they're able to go and move more freely. And they end up, the main character ends up in the Republic of Moldova, and the town that she ends up is actually, the name of it in Romanian is Troița, which is roadside cross. So roadside crosses is also kind of about the role of commemoration and what happens afterwards. And there's a sort of kind of funny fake commemorations that sort of happen, where the government at some point acknowledges that they, made a mistake. But then, that's not enough. And so there's this idea of like, what actually is the way that you can honor the victims of this tragedy? And that's where these other, both, literal roadside crosses to commemorate, but also the imaginary ones that have to take on this other form of commemoration. So there's, I think, a range of what that phrase means in the third section.
Și zona de unde au fost deportați bucovinienii a devenit hotarul Uniunii Sovietice și Stalin obișnuia să pună la hotar popoare prietene. Ori românii bucovineni nu erau popor prieten și atunci ei nu puteau să se întoarcă înapoi în Bucovina și ei se stabileau în Moldova.
So also something else that Liliana mentioned is because the area that they had been deported from, the characters in this novel, was at the border, or the new border between the Soviet Union and Romania. The people who had been there originally weren't allowed to return. Those areas had to be repopulated with people from elsewhere. And so the people who originally lived in those villages in this story end up in the Republic of Moldova. And this is something that actually happened. So she wanted this to be what
Astăzi
these characters went
zona
through.
este, să zic așa, depopulată. Români sunt foarte puțini în Bucovina.
So now, today there are very few Romanians still in that area where they've been deported from.
Sunt câteva sate.
Just a few villages.
Is there anything else you want your reader to attend to or carry away from the reading of this
Vreau
book?
să spun că the original name of the novel is Capătul drumului. This is the end of the journey, but the English was the Too Great a Sky, and we have a title proposed by Monica, and the cover is the picture of Ukrainian and painter Arhip Coimji, and this is like a picture and parcel, like.
And it's a painting that's upside down. So we really love the cover design.
Yes.
That we kind of all collaborated
And
on.
this was idea of Seven Story Press to
turn it upside down,
yeah.
the painting, the original painting.
Well, I not knowing that story, I love this because the first place we hear that phrase, too great a sky, it seems to me is, well, it shows up right away at the beginning of the novel, but the beginning of the novel is briefly when the deportees get off the train and having been for weeks mostly shut in the train cars to come outside and feel that the sky is too great is so disorienting, as if to say it's not a place where you can land. It's as if everything is upside down. And I know our time is short. I wish we could read the passage in Exile. There's so many kinds of work that they take up in Exile. Some really remarkable things talk about fishing. And it's as if they're fishing in the sky too. So the sky comes back again and again. as something that is both beautiful but terrifying,
menacing, absolutely.
because they are so disoriented and displaced and unplanted. But I will also say, in the other book of yours that I read, in Kinderland, there's an idea at the end of the book of getting to the horizon. And in that book, it's a rather wonderful destination. But that is, in a way, a child's story. And this is full of so many stories. It's about not even having a horizon that you could get to.
It just keeps going. I mean, it's just one life and death situation after another. And then when there's finally a sense of safety, I mean, there's this kind of questioning, you know, what are you left with? And isn't there something that is lost actually when you're now safe, that you had to leave behind as well?
Well, maybe we should see what questions
we could talk forever.
have been showing up in the Q&A. So let me see if I can read some of these. Here's the first one for Monica. You've translated a few of Liliana's novels now. I'd love to hear how you came to her work originally and what your working relationship is like.
Yeah, great question. How did I come to her? It was really through Seven Stories Press. They were already interested in the first novel, The Censor's Notebook, and I was a reader for it and absolutely fell in love with The Censor's Notebook and basically proposed myself as the translator for that novel. And it worked out just absolutely wonderfully, because I had by this point moved to Bucharest and Liliana was living in Bucharest. So I don't remember who reached out to whom first. And maybe I contacted you first? I contacted her first. I was like, why not? We're here. And we've become friends. So that's a really wonderful, you know, thing that sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. And in our case, we're able to become friends. And that was, I think, especially crucial for Too Great of Sky, which for me was the most difficult of the novels that I've translated of hers. And we really had to kind of work together to find some solutions for certain things that just, you know, weren't working as well. And yeah, we changed a few things together.
The next question is about the cover, so we answered that one. Here's a question for Liliana. You spoke about needing to come to a greater understanding of religion and prayer in order to tell the stories. Can you tell more about what process and practices helped you to make the connections and come to an understanding? Thank you for your beautiful work and this wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you for the question. It was not my first idea with religion. I have some fragments in other novel before, but it was not obligatory for me to be a true believer and to come around prayers, rugăciuni. But some months before writing, I prepare me, I think, in religious way. Eu am încercat să nu fac niciun păcat, să nu vorbesc de rău, să nu fiu un om rău și am căutat cărți religioase. Asta.
So in the period leading up to writing, she really made an effort not to sin, not to speak badly about anyone, and she also read prayer books.
Am simțit că am nevoie de o pregătire și de o, să zic așa, de o, nu știu dacă forță, dar n-a fost așa de greu pentru că a venit mereu spre mine. Adică am scris destul de ușor și destul de repede cartea.
I felt like I needed to prepare myself, but actually I felt like it was coming towards me and that I actually wrote the book quite easily.
Am citit literatură religioasă, am citit pildă Dostoevski.
I read religious books. I read The Parable of Dostoevsky.
Am citit cărți despre religie și cărți de rugăciuni, chiar rugăciuni aveam și citeam în fiecare zi.
So she also read, you know, books about religion in general, but also actual books of prayers.
Am încercat să înțeleg și am avut, de fapt, în familie bunici foarte religioase. Am încercat să înțeleg cum au supraviețuit oamenii și, de fapt, lor le-a fost ușor pentru că orice greutate o aveau, ei ziceau, Dumnezeu știe ce face cu mine.
She'd actually had religious grandparents, very religious grandparents. And so as she was trying to understand their mindset, she realized that it was actually, easier for them to survive because whenever anything would happen, they would say,
Dumnezeu știe de ce
God knows why this is happening to me. God knows why he's allowed this to happen. So it gave them meaning.
Pe de o parte, eu am încercat să citesc literatură religioasă ca să am și vocabularul, pentru că noi nu vorbim astăzi.
And so I also wanted to read religious books to be able to get a handle on the vocabulary associated with religious language.
Și să intru în pielea unui deportat care are această soartă și care a trecut prin foarte multe greutăți și a supraviețuit.
And to be able to empathize and really get into the mind of a survivor of the deportation.
Și totodată a existat această conexiune pentru prezent, că toate cărțile mele sunt îndreptate spre cititorul actual de astăzi.
And
Totodată acest roman și altele sunt conectate spre prezent, adică nu doar ce-au trăit deportații în 41.
And this book was about the present moment, so not just about what the deportees in 41 experienced.
M-a interesat să găsesc sau să propun soluții pentru cei care au ce să mănânce, au tot ce le trebuie și totuși sunt nefericiți.
And so I was thinking about readers today who, even though they have enough to eat, they're still very unhappy.
Și acești oameni care au trecut prin foarte multe greutăți sunt senini, înțelepți și au o fericire care nouă astăzi ne lipsește.
And the survivors who went through all these terrible things, they're peaceful, they're happy. And it's quite a contrast for people today who are unhappy.
Și cred că m-a interesat încă de la începutul carierei mele literare de supraviețuire în situații limită.
And I've always been interested since the beginning of my career in survivors who, were surviving life and death situations or really extreme situations.
Și mi s-a întâmplat acum mai amuzant așa să mă gândesc la un fel de mâncare care, nu știu, n-a ieșit prea bine sau poate nu e cel mai delicios și mă gândeam la deportații, la copiii deportați care scormoneau în gunoaie ca să iau o bucățică de varză și să o duc acasă și asta era ceva foarte bun.
And kind of, humorously sometimes, when something I make doesn't turn out that well or it's not that tasty, I would think about the children of deportees who, for them, picking out a leaf of cabbage was a delicacy. From the garbage they'd find a piece that was whole.
Și cred că avem nevoie de acea simplitate și de acea înțelepciune pe care oamenii aceștia o au. Poate că n-ar fi ajuns la ea dacă n-ar fi trecut prin ce au trecut, dar sunt niște exemple de supraviețuire absolut relevante.
Yeah, and these are examples of survival that are absolutely relevant today. The simplicity and the wisdom of these people, they might not have come to it by any other means.
Sper că am răspuns. I hope I answered your question.
Let me see if there are further questions. Pierce, I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing.
That's okay, I'm here. So, Monica, what made this book the hardest to translate? What alterations did you make together?
Yeah, so as Liliana had mentioned at some point, some of the details of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, there are a lot of different cultures in this book because of the way these deportees lived among other deportees. And so, it started off, and I read about this a little bit in the foreword, the translator's note. I was at first just wanting to see, okay, how would this, Kazakh word be spelled in English, not just kind of in Romanian. And when I was doing them, I'm like, wait, this doesn't seem like it means this thing. And realizing some of these were mixed up in the manuals that Liliana had read. So together we were like, okay, let's think, is this the word we want to use? Is there something else we want to to use instead. So the cultural differences was a real challenge, just because, I know Romanian, but there were many other cultures. It's a very multicultural book. And then also the songs and the poems. I'm a poet as well, so it is in my wheelhouse, but I just wasn't expecting it to be so many different poems and folk songs and riddles. There's a lot of just different sorts of writing in this book. There's a great variety and diversity. So it was a challenge, which one that I loved, but absolutely, definitely the hardest book I've ever translated.
There's a passage that maybe pertains to some of this. I don't know if you'd want to read either from here or from here. This is early in the exile section, when people are trying to figure out how to talk to each other.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, this is really Kude. And the poor Romanians they were housing were kicked out, even if it were cold enough for stones to crack. Quaniash, they'd yell when they were happy, but usually not in front of us. Mascara, they grumbled when they were upset. When they'd see that we were upset, they'd say, "You dirty muskrats." That's how we interpreted the displeasure, but that's not the word for muskrat. There, mascara is a kind of poor me, goodness, oh no, or sigh. Same bebak were swear words. We were on the receiving end of those as well. So, I mean, there's also a lot of misinterpretation, right? Because the Romanians that end up in Kazakhstan, they don't know the Kazakh language at first. They don't know Russian at first. So they're kind of hearing these words and kind of making up their own meanings at times. And some of them are kind of, sort of comical interpretations that I had to find, okay, what kind of puns can I make in English with those misinterpretations? Great passage.
Are there any additional questions?
No, that is it.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say is there's a lot of humor, even though it is this life or death kind of situation and there is so much trauma that happens as well. There's also so much humor, and I think that's what I love about Liliana's writing that happens is so much a hallmark of her style is this humor. So when I was mentioning this kind of government acknowledgement that a mistake was made, they give some kind of restitution, but it's really almost nothing. And the narrator and her husband decide to buy a goat with it, and they name it after
They name the goat Rehabilitation.
yes, because they now are no longer enemies of the state, of the people. They are rehabilitated, so they name the goat Rehabilitation. That sometimes gets shortened to nickname Rahibili, Billy, just all these different names. So
you didn't know Billy Goat was short for rehabilitation.
right, exactly. That's what it actually stands for.
I love that. We have one more question. What word in Romanian do you find the most difficult to find a perfect translation for in English?
Oh my goodness.
Such a tough one.
Such a tough one. I mean, there's a stereotypical answer that all Romanians will say dor is the most difficult word, a kind of longing. And in some ways, this whole novel is about longing, is about dor.
But
Dor, D-O-R.
so when is a door not a door?
Yeah, and it comes up a lot. So I've translated a lot as yearning or longing, but the fullest, of course, is in context. And this novel is a lot about longing for a homeland, longing for family, longing for a way of life that is gone forever, longing for something maybe that you can't even quite put your finger on. So maybe this whole novel is a translation of the word dor.